we're going to start assembling this Ford 8.8 center section. I put the bearing races in the freezer last night. I'm going to get those put in, and then we'll start working on the pinion. I've got to take the old pinion apart so I can get the shim off of it, at least start with the same size pinion. One of the things I hate is putting something together and taking it apart and repeating over and over, but from what I've studied on this, I don't think there's really many options other than just trial and error. I've only worked on a rear differential one other time, and that I was just the assistant then. My brother did most of the work. So anyway, we're going to get this 8.8 put together and see how things turn out. I'm not sure how these plastic sawhorses are going to work for driving this pinion in, but we'll give it a shot, and if I get too much bounce and don't get any drive, then we'll try something else. So I guess we'll just try another whack or two. Plain whack-a-mole here. There, I heard the tone change. So hopefully, yeah, we're definitely much further down in. So this is the smallest feeler gauge I have. It's a 0.04 millimeter. And it will not go in anywhere around there. So I know I've got that one done. Just need to flip it over and put the other one in. Using a little WD-40 as a lubricant to drive these in. Alright, the next thing I need to do is get the bearing off the old pinion so I can get that shim and see what thickness it is, because that's what I want to use for a starting point. I also bought an extra bearing for the new pinion. I'm going to try to ream it out just a little bit so it slides on and off and doesn't have to be pressed on and off, and use it as a setup bearing. It's the exact same Timken bearing as the one that came in my kit. And then on final assembly, I'll do the bearing that came with the kit as a press-on bearing. I've got my old pinion here. When I took the rear diff apart, I bagged everything, bagged each of the bearings and the shims and all, so I can actually measure how the original rear diff was set up on this and use those as starting points. But what I've got to do is I've got to get this pressed on bearing off. I've got a, I think they call it a bearing separator here. Yeah, bearing separator and puller kit. So I'm going to try to use that, see if I can get this off. If that doesn't work, then I'm just going to take a Dremel and cut the cage off and then cut the sleeve on a couple sides to get this old bearing, because this old bearing I have no use for it. And even the pinion, you know, the thing I need is a shim that is between the pinion and this bearing. Alright, the studs that came with this bearing separator weren't long enough, so I had to run down to Tractor Supply and get a couple grade 8 bolts. But I've got this set up, and we're going to see if we can get it off with this. Probably should figure out a way to hold that. It's amazing how easy things can be when you have the right tool. Looking for my shim and it came off with the bearing. So that's what we were after, that pinion shim. It took a little while, but I was probably being overly cautious. I didn't want to get too much off, get it too loose. But it does slide down now with a little bit of pressure. Just put a little WD-40 on it for lubrication, and I can lift it off. But it is snug when it gets to the bottom. So that's going to be my setup bearing. And I know I ruined the bearing for any real use, but what I'll do is I'll take a marker and mark that box as a Ford 8.8 pinion setup bearing, and that way I don't accidentally use it on anything else, and I'll have it for the future if I need it. So I've got my original pinion shim that came out of this diff. Got my setup bearing. I'm going to put a little, this is just regular motor oil, but I just didn't want these bearings to be completely dry. The new pinion tail bearing that I have is going to be a press fit also, which is going to be a bit of an issue. I guess I'll use the actual pinion nut to press it on. But again, expecting to have to take this apart at least a couple times to get things set up. I didn't want to have to deal with that. So I didn't have a new bearing to make a setup bearing, but I measured my old bearing to the new bearing, and they're dead on. So while the one may have some wear and be a little looser, have a little more slop, you know, they are the same thickness. So I took and hogged out my old bearing to be a setup tail bearing. And thinking about that, you know, again, if I were to do this over, rather than ruin a new bearing as a setup bearing on the head side, I think I would maybe use the old bearing the same way, you know, get it off, pull it, and then hog out the inside to where it slides on and off easily. I don't know whether that's right or not, but anyway, I've got a brand new bearing hogged out as a setup bearing. I've got my old bearing hogged out as a setup bearing on the tail side. I'm using my old nut, my old oil, oil slinger and a new crush sleeve. So that's what I'm doing. I've got my old pinion shim, putting that on. The new bearing that is hogged out. Guess I can go ahead and put the crush sleeve on here. And my old bearing that's hogged out. My oil slinger. Pinion flange, which is going to take just a little persuasion. I don't know whether I should put the pinion seal in at this point or not. My plan was to wait and put the pinion seal in on final assembly. I can't see where that would affect anything. Okay, got all the slop out of it now. So now I got to get my torque wrench to measure resistance. I can tell that's still not enough. May sound like I'm running that a long time, but what I'm doing is I'm watching the hole in the socket and it's just moving ever so slowly. Ooh. And that little bit. And I'm going to bet I got too much there. I'm going to bet that's actually too much. Good morning. We're going to get back on this Ford 8.8. I started this video a long time ago, over a year ago, more like a year and a half ago. I got the pinion in and started to work on the carrier, and I forget, I needed to press the bearings onto the carrier, and my bearing press is not here, it's at another location. And I just never got it done, and then a lot of things came up, and so this whole project's just been on hold for about a year and a half. But I got started back on it a couple weeks ago. I did get the carrier in, got everything set up, patterned. Had a couple guys that I trust look at the pattern. They said it looked okay, the backlash looked okay. So then I tore it all apart, and now I've got to do the final assembly. Remove the bearing off the pinion. It was a setup bearing that was a little bit hogged out, so it was a little bit oversized, so it slipped on and off easy. I've got to replace that with the final bearing. I've got my pinion in the freezer. I'm going to put the bearing on a hot plate, and hopefully I can get that on without having to use a press. And then I've got to Loctite the bolts on the ring gear and get them torqued to spec and just do all the final assembly things. So what I'm doing now here in April 2026 is I'm doing the final assembly of this Ford 8.8 that I cut down so I can get measured for the axles and get the axles ordered. Okay, I've spent a bunch of time going through measuring, getting my shims and everything set up left to right for the carrier, just some quick dimensions here. My original pinion shim was 0.031 inches, and that's what I used for my setup, and that's what I'm going with for my final assembly. 0.031 inches on the pinion shim. The original crush bearing was 0.4390 inches. I used a new crush bearing when I did my preliminary setup, and that one came out to 0.4450 inches. So again, I'm assuming that's a little bit difference in the manufacturer of the actual pinion. So anyway, I'm not using a crush bearing on the final assembly. I'm going with the crush bearing eliminator. It's a solid piece with a shim, and I've got it set up at 0.4450, so it matches exactly the crush bearing that I took out after my preliminary setup. My carrier shims on the passenger side, the original shim was 0.2650 inches. The shim I'm going back with is 0.254 inches. That's on the passenger side. On the driver's side, the original shim was 0.2525 inches, and I'm going back with 0.250 inches. So the total difference between the original shims, and it was really hard to get that carrier, the original carrier out. And again, I'm using a different carrier. I'm using the Detroit True Track. But anyway, I'm coming up that I've only got like 13 thousandths of an inch difference total width of both shims added together. And that gave me, I was right at, let's see, you're supposed to be between 8 and 12 thousandths backlash, and I had 6 thousandths backlash. So I'm hoping, you know, obviously I'll have to check that all again, the backlash and the pattern, but I'm hoping the way I currently have this set up, that will move that 6 thousandths backlash up to 8 thousandths. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but we'll find out. But I'll do it as many times as it takes to get this right. Before I forget it, I'm going to put Loctite on the ring gear bolts and get them torqued to spec. Alright, these torque to 100 foot-pounds. Alright, I got my pinion bearing on the pinion, the new pinion bearing. Just FYI, the pinion was put in the freezer for several days, and then I warmed the bearing up on the hot plate, and I had it up, I forget, 450 degrees, and it did not go on. I had to take it out and get it pressed on, which caused me some time. So I was able to get the ring gear heated on the hot plate and just drop it on the center section without any issues, but I could not get the bearings on the center section, either one, or the pinion bearing using the hot plate heating them up. So for what that's worth, you probably want to have a bearing press. I have one, but it's not here. It's out at my brother's, which is a half-hour drive. Yesterday I quit working on this after taking it apart, I don't know, a dozen times or more, trying to get this pinion preload, the bearing preload correct. The crushed sleeve eliminator comes with one thick spacer and then 5 different size shims. And everything I tried seemed to be either too loose or too tight. But this morning I gave it another try and I've got it in the range. It's on the low end of the range, and they actually say with new bearings you're better off to be at the high end of the range, but I've tried every combination and actually went back to my very first setup. So the range is 16 to 28 inch-pounds, and I have about 18 inch-pounds. And that's the one I'm going with. So I can go ahead now, and I should be done taking this pinion in and out. So I'm going to go ahead and take the nut off one more time, remove this flange that that you use for holding it when you're tightening things. I'm going to put in my pinion seal and then put on my new pinion nut, and then I'll be ready to start working on the carrier. Alright, if I took that pinion apart 100 times to get that preload set correctly, I've taken this carrier apart 50 times at least, trying to get this backlash right. Such small shims make such a huge difference in the movement, and it seems like my shims are not small enough. But hopefully you can see here, I've got the dial indicator on 0, and my backlash is now 12, maybe 13. Maybe 13. 8 to 12 is the backlash. I had 6, and now I have 13, and I'm using the smallest shims I've got to change. So I'm going to go with that 13, unless I wake up tomorrow morning and feel ambitious and decide to take it apart another 50 times. I'm going to go with that 13 thousandths of backlash.